Something happened to you at some point. Maybe gradually, maybe all at once. You looked around at the people in your life, the group chats, the Sunday dinners, the old friends, the family members, and quietly, almost without planning it, you started pulling back. Fewer replies, shorter calls, more declined invitations than you'd care to admit out loud. And here's the part that surprises people when you say it out loud. You don't miss it. Not the way you're supposed to, anyway. You don't lie awake wishing the phone would ring. You don't scroll through contacts with a hollow feeling in your chest. If anything, the quiet that moved in when the noise moved out feels less like loss and more like finally. Like exhaling after holding your breath for years without realizing it. Which probably confuses people, because we live in a world that treats connection like oxygen. More is better, always. Loneliness is an epidemic, we're told, and statistically, that's true. But nobody stops to ask a harder question. What if some of that so-called loneliness is actually something else entirely? What if for some people, the disconnection wasn't a thing that happened to them, but a choice they slowly, deliberately, quietly made for themselves? Let me tell you what I think actually happened to you. At some point in your past, maybe childhood, maybe your 20s, maybe a single specific relationship, you were the one who showed up. Fully, consistently. You were the person who answered, the one who remembered, the one who could be called at an unreasonable hour and would pick up without making it weird. You carried people. Not because anyone asked you to formally, but because it was just what you did. It was who you were. And for a while, that felt like love, like purpose. But there's something that happens when you give that way, for long enough, to people who don't give it back. It's not dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. One day, you just notice that you've been listening to the same person complain about the same situation for the third year in a row, offering the same advice that goes nowhere, watching nothing change. And somewhere in that moment, something in you goes very, very quiet. Not angry, not bitter, just done. And you stop picking up. What most people don't realize is that moment isn't weakness. Your brain wasn't malfunctioning. It was doing something remarkably sophisticated. Psychologist Stephen Porges spent years developing what he called the Polyvagal Theory. The idea that your nervous system isn't just a background system. It's a constant surveillance operation, reading every interaction, every relationship, every room you walk into, and making decisions about where it's safe to be open and where it needs to protect you. When it decides you've been in an unsafe dynamic for too long, it doesn't wait for a committee meeting. It just starts quietly withdrawing your energy, pulling you back into yourself, conserving what's yours. Your nervous system didn't break down. It executed a decision your conscious mind had been too polite to make. But here's what makes this more interesting. That protective instinct, that early radar for when something or someone is costing more than they're giving, it didn't come from nowhere. For a lot of people who relate to this, it was built early, quietly, through years of watching, reading, adjusting. Maybe you grew up in a house where the mood could shift without warning, where you learned to read a person's face before they opened their mouth, where love and tension lived in the same room so often you couldn't always tell them apart. Psychologist Bowen described a pattern he called emotional cutoff. What develops when someone learns, usually young, that closeness isn't always safe, that getting close to people carries a cost you didn't agree to. So you adapted. You got good at sensing things before they were said. You learned that a certain kind of silence in your own company was genuinely safer than a certain kind of noise around other people. You weren't damaged by that. You were shaped by it. Now here's where I want to be honest with you, because this conversation deserves honesty more than it deserves comfort. Not every wall is a boundary, and there is a real, meaningful difference between the two. Walls go up because of fear. They don't discriminate. They block the person who would drain you and the person who might genuinely see you and the person who's uncertain but worth figuring out. All equally, all without review. Walls feel like safety because nothing gets in. But nothing gets in. Boundaries are different. Boundaries come from self-knowledge. They're selective, specific. A boundary says you, not everyone. It's the result of paying attention and choosing accordingly. If you cut someone off and felt relief, pay attention to that. That's not cruelty. That's your nervous system recognizing something your logic had been rationalizing around. But if cutting people off has become the default, if the circle keeps shrinking and you can't quite remember the last time you let anyone new fully in, that's worth sitting with. Not with judgment, just with honesty. Because the research is unambiguous on what prolonged isolation does to a body, not just the mind, the body. The risk data on heart disease, on inflammation, on shortened lifespan, it's real, and it's worth taking seriously. But so is this. Being surrounded by the wrong people carries its own damage. Chronic stress from draining relationships isn't neutral. It accumulates. It rewires things. So the question was never really how many people, it was always which ones. Here's something that strikes me about people who've gone through this kind of quiet withdrawal. The ones who choose smaller, more deliberate circles. They're not bad at relationships. They're often extraordinarily perceptive about them. A 2023 study in Nature Neuroscience found that people who experienced emotional stress early in life showed significantly heightened activity in the brain's threat detection regions. On the surface, that sounds like a problem, but the researchers framed it differently, as a form of accelerated social processing. Your brain, having learned early that people can be unpredictable, simply got much better at reading them, at picking up on subtle inconsistencies, at noticing when what someone says and how they say it don't quite align. That friend who only surfaces when they need something, you spotted the pattern before they finished the first request. That family member who gives compliments with conditions attached, you knew what those compliments cost before you learned to name it. That's not paranoia. That's pattern recognition at a level most people never develop because they never had reason to. Your radar isn't broken. It's been calibrated by experience. The world has a few unflattering words for people like you. Antisocial, closed off, cold. I want to offer a different one. Selective. And underneath that, a distinction that I think matters more than almost anything else in this conversation. There is a genuine difference between loneliness and solitude, and the difference is everything. Loneliness is the ache of wanting connection you don't have. Solitude is the quiet of connection you don't need right now. One is absence, the other is presence. Of yourself, to yourself. If you're sitting in a quiet apartment on a Saturday evening and it feels like peace rather than punishment, you are not lonely. You are resting in a life you chose. That's not nothing. For a lot of people, that's everything. You're not running away from something. You've been moving toward something. Toward a version of your life that doesn't require you to betray your own instincts to keep other people comfortable. So if you're watching this carrying some quiet version of the question, is something wrong with me? I want to give you a straight answer. No. You are not heartless. You are not incapable. You are not someone who gave up on people. You are someone who paid very close attention to people for a very long time. And you made careful decisions based on what you actually learned. That is not coldness. That is an integrity most people never fully develop because it's too uncomfortable to act on. The Harvard study of adult development, 75 years of following people through their actual lives, found that the quality of your close relationships matters more to your long-term health and happiness than almost any other factor. Not the quantity, the quality. If your circle is small and you chose every person in it deliberately, if the people in your life actually know you rather than just a version of you that was easier to maintain, you are not falling short of some social standard. You are living one of the most psychologically healthy configurations a life can take. Protect what you've built. It took something to build it. And if any part of this felt like something you've been needing someone to say, drop it in the comments. I read every single one.